Well, the title's Real Country Music.
Yeah.
It comes out the 26th, February the 26th. You can get pre-order copies right now by going to our website, genewatsonmusic.com.
A man whose voice carried the weight of sorrow and the beauty of truth. Gene Watson never relied on flash or gimmicks. His music came straight from the heart, raw and unshaken by trends. Yet behind the haunting voice was a story most fans never knew. A life built on poverty, struggle, heartbreak, and unshakable grit. To understand why his songs cut so deeply, you have to walk back to where it all began, in a dusty corner of Texas, where survival shaped every note he would ever sing. Gene Watson's story begins in Palestine, Texas, on October 11, 1943. He was not born into privilege, not surrounded by luxury or comfort, but into a world where survival itself was an everyday battle. His parents were migrant farm workers, moving across the South wherever the promise of work appeared. The family of 7 children lived in a converted school bus that doubled as both their transportation and their home. It was cramped, it was rough, and it was all they had. Nights were long, hot, and restless, but in that bus, something extraordinary was taking shape. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a place where music bloomed. After grueling days in the cotton fields, Gene's mother would pick up her guitar and fill the air with gospel hymns, and the children would sing alongside her. Those evenings weren't entertainment. They were survival of a different kind, spiritual nourishment that softened the blow of hunger and exhaustion. Gene absorbed those sounds deeply. Long before he ever dreamed of a stage, music was his anchor, his family's bond, their way of remembering that life had meaning beyond back-breaking labor. His father wasn't a musician, but he was a man of quiet resilience, reminding his children that values mattered more than possessions. Gene learned to work with his hands, to fix things, to earn his keep. School often came second to survival, and by 9th grade, he had dropped out entirely. Yet, this difficult beginning wasn't wasted. It gave him discipline, humility, and a sense of honesty that would later echo through his songs. Every time he sang, people didn't just hear music. They heard the story of a boy who grew up with nothing but faith, hard work, and a dream he didn't yet know he carried. Despite the roughness of his early years, Gene never let despair consume him. He grew up fast because childhood luxuries simply weren't an option. He worked side by side with his parents in fields, picking cotton under the unforgiving Texas sun, hauling water, or helping care for his younger siblings. Gene didn't just watch his parents struggle, he was part of the fight for survival. Yet in that daily grind, he discovered something else: music as a lifeline. While others saw it as entertainment, Gene felt it was a thread that tied him to God, to his family, and to hope. By the time he was a teenager, he had already learned the importance of resilience. He was no stranger to hunger, to uncertainty, to the reality that tomorrow was never promised. Still, every evening when his mother played guitar and sang, Gene realized that music could transform pain into something almost sacred. It wasn't about applause or fame, it was about peace. At the same time, he was learning skills that would keep him grounded all his life. Gene had a natural knack for fixing cars, something that gave him purpose and later a livelihood. He opened an automotive repair shop as a teenager, working long hours during the day, covered in grease and sweat, while music remained a quiet flame in the background. To him, chasing the dream of stardom seemed irresponsible when his family needed him, when food had to be put on the table. So he sang not for glory, but for love, for healing, and for faith. Those early lessons carved his character, hard-working, humble, and rooted. Even before stepping onto a stage, Gene had already built the foundation of what would make his voice so powerful. It wasn't just sound, it was lived truth. Music eventually began to take a stronger hold of him, though it came slowly. As a boy, Gene would sit quietly, listening to records by Hank Williams, Ernest Tubb, and Lefty Frizzell. Their voices weren't distant celebrities to him. They were companions on long nights when the fields felt endless. Gene soon realized he had a gift of his own, one that stood out even in church gatherings. He sang his first solo in front of the congregation, and the reaction was unforgettable. People leaned in, stunned by the richness of his tone. It wasn't polished yet, but it was undeniable. Soon, invitations began coming in from local events and small community gatherings. Gene had found a way to turn his hardship into something that resonated deeply with others. In his teenage years, he and his brother Jesse formed the Watson Brothers group, playing in honky-tonks and community halls across Texas. The crowds weren't glamorous. They were working-class men and women who found themselves in Gene's songs. He wasn't singing at them. He was singing for them, as one of them. By then, Gene had also learned guitar, blending his heartfelt voice with simple yet stirring melodies. Nights were smoky, noisy, and filled with the raw energy of barroom audiences, but they sharpened his ability to command attention. Even while building this budding reputation, Gene never abandoned his auto repair work. He fixed cars by day and sang by night, pouring nearly every dollar he earned into sustaining his music. It wasn't about making it big yet. It was about survival, about honoring a gift he couldn't ignore. Those dual lives, mechanic and musician, would define him for years. But it was in those small Texas clubs, not in Nashville boardrooms, that Gene Watson forged his identity as an artist. He wasn't chasing fame. He was telling the truth. As Gene juggled his mechanic work and late-night gigs, his life looked nothing like the glamorous country stars people saw on TV. By day, he was under the hood of a car, hands blackened with grease, tools scattered around his small shop in Houston. By night, he was dressed in simple clothes, guitar in hand, stepping onto dimly lit stages at honky-tonks and dance halls. This balance wasn't easy. The exhaustion was constant, and money was tight. Still, Gene believed in staying grounded. Music wasn't a reliable paycheck, and he couldn't risk his family's security chasing dreams that might never materialize. Yet the more he sang, the harder it became to treat music as just a side passion. Crowds kept growing, and whispers about his voice spread across Texas. What set him apart wasn't flashy showmanship or commercial polish. It was the way his voice carried emotion, as though every word had been carved out of real pain and lived experience. By the early 1960s, Gene decided to test himself. In 1962, he recorded his first single, If It's That Easy, for the Small Sun Valley label. It didn't make the charts, didn't bring a record deal, and certainly didn't change his financial reality. But it was proof that his music mattered enough to document. He kept working at his shop, kept singing at night, never losing sight of either role. To Gene, being a mechanic meant stability. Being a singer meant possibility. Slowly, his name spread beyond Houston. He became known not only for his soulful delivery, but also for his humility, always approachable, always real. Fans saw him as one of their own, a man who fixed cars during the day but could sing about heartbreak with the authority of someone who lived it. The dual life wasn't easy, but it was shaping a legend. The real turning point came in 1975. For over a decade, Gene had been grinding quietly, building respect in Texas but waiting for that elusive break. Then came Love in the Hot Afternoon. The song wasn't just another country track. It was a sultry, vulnerable ballad about a forbidden summer romance in New Orleans. It carried an ache, a tension, and a raw sensuality that felt unlike anything else on the radio. Gene released it independently on Resco Records, never expecting much beyond his local following. But the song had a power that couldn't be contained. Word spread fast. The haunting quality of Gene's delivery caught the attention of Capitol Records, who quickly picked it up and promoted it nationally. Within weeks, the song soared to number 3 on the Billboard Country chart, marking his first national hit. For the first time, Gene's voice wasn't confined to smoky Texas bars. It was being played across the country, reaching homes, trucks, and diners everywhere. For a man who had been dismissed as a local act for years, it was vindication. Crowds grew, interviews came, and suddenly the spotlight was on him. Yet, true to his nature, Gene didn't let it change him. He still carried himself with the humility of a mechanic who got lucky, never letting success cloud his authenticity. What Love in the Hot Afternoon proved was simple. Gene Watson didn't need gimmicks. His voice was enough. His honesty was enough. For fans, it felt like they had finally discovered the real thing. and they were hooked. That first breakthrough opened the door to an avalanche of hits. In 1977, he released Paper Rosie, a poignant ballad about a boy's encounter with a flower vendor, drenched in nostalgia and sorrow. It became a fan favorite, cementing his reputation as a master storyteller. Then came Nothing Sure Looked Good on You in 1979, another aching reminder of lost love. But the defining moment of his career arrived with Farewell Party. Though it only reached number 5 on the charts, its impact was seismic. Gene's restrained, heart-wrenching delivery, capped by a falsetto finale that felt both fragile and eternal, turned it into his signature song. It wasn't just another hit, it was an anthem of grief, love, and inevitability. Fans didn't just listen to Farewell Party. They carried it with them, playing it at funerals, at partings, and in quiet moments of reflection. Gene Watson became known as the voice of truth in country music, a man who could translate unbearable sorrow into melody without ever overreaching. Success finally allowed him to step away from his auto repair work, though he always insisted he could return to it if music failed him. By 1981, he reached his first #1 hit with 14 Karat Mind, a clever, catchy song that expanded his reach to an even broader audience. The 1980s proved fruitful, filled with notable releases like Speak Softly, You're Talking to My Heart, and Got No Reason Now for Going Home. While Nashville was crowded with emerging stars and shifting sounds, Gene Watson stood apart. His voice wasn't flashy, but it had something most lacked: depth. Even other singers admired him, calling him a singer's singer. At the height of his fame, Gene wasn't just topping charts. He was carrying the torch for traditional country. Yet, as he would soon discover, the industry he loved could be as unforgiving as life in those East Texas cotton fields. For all the success Gene had carved out, the late 1980s brought him face to face with one of the cruelest blows of his career. Financial mismanagement and a bitter legal dispute nearly destroyed everything he had worked for. His manager at the time, Lib Hatcher, promised big opportunities, pairing him with rising stars like Randy Travis, tours, and national promotion. But those promises never materialized. Instead, Gene found himself stuck in contracts that drained him financially and emotionally. When he tried to break free, Hatcher sued him. The lawsuit froze his career in place. Labels backed away, fearing legal entanglements, and Warner Brothers dropped him after releasing just one album. Suddenly, Gene was barred from new deals, left without representation, and buried in mounting debt. For a man who only knew how to sing, the realities of the business world hit like a hammer. It was heartbreaking. On stage, he gave everything to his audiences, his songs pouring out with raw sincerity. Behind the curtain, though, he was unraveling, betrayed by the very system that should have celebrated him. In a split second, Gene went from chart-topping star to an artist fighting for survival, not because of talent, but because of betrayal. As the 1990s dawned, Gene faced another tragedy: the slow, brutal indifference of the music industry. Country music was changing, and not in his favor. Nashville leaned towards slicker, pop-influenced sounds. Artists like Garth Brooks, Shania Twain, and Faith Hill dominated airwaves, bringing in crossover audiences. Meanwhile, the steel guitars and aching ballads that defined Gene Watson's sound were pushed aside. He was labeled outdated, not because he lacked talent, but because he refused to chase trends. He could have polished his sound, dressed it up for radio, but compromise wasn't in his nature. Instead, he doubled down on tradition, staying loyal to the kind of country he believed in. Radio stations phased him out, labels stopped calling, and even award shows overlooked him. For a man with over 25 top 10 hits, the silence was deafening. He returned to smaller venues, honky-tonks, county fairs, and regional festivals. Loyal fans came, but the headlines were gone. Gene admitted in interviews he sometimes felt forgotten. It wasn't bitterness, it was heartbreak. To pour your soul into a craft, only to watch the industry move on without you, was a wound that cut deep. Yet through it all, he kept singing. Tradition mattered more than trends. Life's cruelties weren't limited to the stage. In 2000, Gene Watson received news that would shake his world: a diagnosis of colon cancer. For a man who had spent decades pushing through hardship, this was a different kind of battle, one that threatened his very life. Surgery and chemotherapy followed, treatments that left him exhausted and frail. He stepped back from touring, forced to focus on healing. Fans feared they might never hear that voice again. But Gene fought with the same quiet resilience that had carried him since childhood. By 2001, doctors delivered hopeful news. His treatment had worked, and he was in recovery. Just as he began rebuilding, tragedy struck again. In 2001, his beloved daughter Terry passed away, a loss deeper than any career setback. For Gene, family was the anchor through every storm, and losing Terry left a wound that no song could heal. Still, he leaned on faith, leaned on music, and leaned on the love of fans who stood by him. He returned to the stage not as a man untouched by grief, but as one who carried it with dignity. His performances became even more profound, every lyric soaked in lived pain. Through poverty, betrayal, illness, and heartbreaking loss, Gene Watson never stopped singing. His voice, raw and unwavering, carried generations through sorrow and joy alike. Though the industry turned its back, his legacy endures, a testament to faith, grit, and truth in song. Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories.